as a side dish to my meal tonight, but also just standing on its own is a really fantastic way to prepare a potato, is something from my childhood and teenage years that I have struggled without ever since having moved away from the United States, and that is the Jojo potato, or the wedged potato. We used to be able to buy them in supermarkets and behind the hot and cold deli counter, especially at places like Fred Meyer, and I miss them with the ranch dip so much. And so this is actually the very first recipe that I believe that I've experimented with and really created on my own, so I'm super excited to show it to you. But what it does mean is that I don't really know quantities and amounts in this recipe because I just started throwing things into a bowl until it worked. So today we're going to take that journey together, and hopefully by the end of it I'll actually be able to give you a basic recipe. But the first things first, we actually have to prepare the potatoes before we do anything else. But if you want to gather up your things, then what we're going to use today is potatoes. I have about 500 grams of little fingerling potatoes here. It honestly doesn't matter to me what kind of potato that you use. I also have cornstarch. I have paprika. I have garlic powder. I have cayenne pepper if you like a little bit of heat. I have salt, and I'm missing my ground pepper, but I'm going to go get it. And I also have some milk laying around because we will use that as well. So in just a second, we're going to start by preparing our potatoes into our wedge shape. I'm ready to prepare my potatoes, and I especially like these little fingerling potatoes because A, they're super small, B, they're really easy to cut into wedges, and C, the bigger the wedge, the longer it takes to cook, and it's just a lot easier for me to not burn the potatoes on the outside while still making them fluffy on the inside, because I don't cook these potatoes twice. They go raw into hot oil. So we want to cut these into wedge shapes, which is really easy because they're nice and long and skinny. So I'm going to start by cutting the potato in half, watching out for my fingers. And then I'm going to cut the halves in half. And that's all I'm going to do. And that makes a perfect wedge. Basically, I'm just going to wedge it up with all these potatoes. And then we will be ready to rock and roll. I now have beautifully wedged potatoes. And the next step here is going to be to rinse these in cold water very well. And then to drain and dry them. And I'll be using this surface covered in paper towels in order to dry my potatoes. We need to do this to get the starch off of the tops and the sides and the outside of the potato, and that will make them ready to sort of take on all of our seasonings and our little bit of batter. So go rinse your potatoes and then come back and join me. I have prepared my work surface for my rinsed and drained potatoes, and here they are. So we're going to lay these out in as flat a row as possible. We want to try not to have any of the potatoes stacked on top of each other, because they will dry more efficiently on the paper towel if we spread them out. So as soon as you think that your potatoes are dry enough, you're going to want to grab yourself a large empty bowl, just like this one here, and you're going to pile your potatoes on into it, because we're going to add everything to the potatoes, rather than mixing it beforehand. We're going to start with our seasonings. Typically I begin with the salt and pepper. And for the purposes of this, remember, I'm trying to create a recipe, so let me grab my ½ teaspoon measuring spoon, and that way we can start with amounts. I am still doing this by looking at it, but at least now I'm measuring it for you guys. So we're going to start with a ½ teaspoon of salt, and I have a distinct feeling just based on that look that we're going to need a whole teaspoon. So there is a whole teaspoon of salt. My ground pepper, I cannot actually measure it, so let's just count the turns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. To me, 15 looks about right for now, so let's do that. So 15 twists of black pepper. We're not going to do a whole ½ teaspoon of cayenne. That would be a little crazy, and hey, look, the universe is telling me that's no good because it doesn't fit into my jar. Let's grab a ¼ teaspoon. There we go. We're going to try for a ¼ teaspoon of cayenne pepper. Maybe just a little bit more. I'm daring. I love my spicy. And we are going to try for a ½ teaspoon of garlic powder. There's my ½ teaspoon of garlic powder. And then finally we're going to go for at least a ½ teaspoon of paprika. I think we're going to aim for 3/4 teaspoon. That looks pretty good. So that's all of our spices. Now it's time to add the cornstarch. Now for the cornstarch, it's going to be closer to a tablespoon or two. We need a lot more cornstarch. It's the cornstarch that's going to make this a batter. So we're starting with 1 tablespoon of cornstarch. I think I'm going to go with 1.5 tablespoons and see what happens. There we go. So that's 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch. Now the final missing ingredient is a little bit of milk. And this is where the amounts get me a little bit lost because I add just enough milk so that this becomes a thick batter, a really thick batter. If it's too thin, it comes off the potatoes. So let's start with just a tablespoon of milk, and then we're going to mix and see where we're at. So remember, just 1 tablespoon, but let's just stir this around with a spoon. And what we should get is a pink, I know, it's crazy, a pink liquid that can coat all of our potatoes. So I would say based on the smell, we've got our spices right, but we do need just a little bit more liquid, a little bit more of the actual batter. So I'm going to add another tablespoon of cornstarch. I have to be careful, I don't want my spices to get diluted, but there's another tablespoon of cornstarch and maybe another half tablespoon of milk. Now let's give that a stir and see what we've got. Excellent, that's already looking much, much better. There is the possibility I might add a little bit more, but honestly, as long as we can see some of that pink liquid on all of our potatoes, then we're looking pretty good. So now, in the background, I have been preheating a pan of oil, or rather a pot. It's a soup pot that's got about 750 milliliters of oil, and we want that oil to be heated not necessarily at a Fahrenheit temperature, but on medium heat, and we don't want it to be so warm that it cooks the outside of the potatoes too quickly, and then the insides won't get fluffy and soft and finished. So I usually, on my 9-burner setting, heat the oil for about 20, 25, 30 minutes at number 5. And I'll even feel comfortable reducing the temperature of that oil a little bit once we put the potatoes in. So we'll be back in about 20 minutes once the oil is preheated so that we can test out the oil temperature and start frying our potatoes. This is just a little mini bonus video to go along with those Jojo potatoes because the one thing I cannot eat a Jojo potato without is some really good ranch dip. And so I'm fortunate enough to have a relative in the United States who likes to send me things from there because ranch is, yet again, not something that you're going to find a whole lot of in Belgium, not really in continental Europe. So what I've got here is some sour cream, which is of course the basis for good ranch dressing mix when you've bought the powdered stuff from the United States, like I have. And what most of us Americans do, honestly, when we make powdered ranch is we just sprinkle it in there until it feels right. I'd say I've probably added a tablespoon or so of this stuff, but I'm really unsure. Now this would make a really good thick dip for chips, just the sour cream and the powder. I'm going to add a little bit of buttermilk because I want it to be slightly thinner because I want to dip my potatoes in it, which means I want it a little bit more runny. I won't need too much of this. I'll add a little bit, stir, and then see if it's the right consistency. I think it needs to be just a little bit thinner. Alright, now I have my tasting spoon to make sure I put enough ranch powder in there. Nope, needs more ranch powder. Probably about double the amount I put in there already. Much better. And that'll be the ranch that goes along with our potatoes. We have returned to our preheated oil, and as a matter of fact, I had the opportunity while I was waiting for this to preheat to do a test potato, and here is what I learned. Number 1, we have to add probably an extra teaspoon of salt to our batter because it's just a little bit on the bland side, but everything else seems to be really well balanced. And number 2, my oil was just a little bit too hot. So I have taken the oil off of the burner for about 5 minutes, and I've reset my heat, my element, to about 4, 4.5 out of 9. So still needs to be quite cool, this oil. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put about 5, 6, 7 potatoes in at a time because they do have a tendency to come together and stick if we're not careful. And it's always a good idea right before you put a new batch into the oil to stir your potatoes around just to make sure that the batter hasn't sunk to the bottom and so that you get an even coating on all of your potatoes. So keep that spoon handy for that. I'm going to be using a set of tongs in order to place gently my potatoes into the oil. I've put in 8. I think we'll start there because as you can see it's bubbling quite hard. Now these are going to have a tendency to stick together. You can use something that's safe for oil, like a metal spoon with holes in it, to very gently, because see, look at that, it's like a ball of potato, to very gently start separating them out because these have to cook like this for about 5 minutes or else you get raw potatoes. So they've just got to sit in there, and the longer that they stay together, the more likely they are to stick together permanently and cook more slowly, which we don't want. So go on in there and fish them out and shake them apart. If you really get ones that are stuck together, I like to use just a fork. And see, they're not really stuck together, it's just hard to do with a spoon. Oh, and before I forget, have a plate with a paper towel on it so that you can drain your potatoes when they're finished cooking. So what we have here is a nice deep golden brown potato. We're going to go ahead and remove these and let them drain on paper towels and continue to fry all of our potatoes until they look just this pretty. And here we have our finished Jojo potatoes along with my dinner serving suggestion, which is crispy, delicious baked chicken wings and a barbecue sauce for the chicken and our delicious ranch sauce for the Jojos. Enjoy.